Whatever happened to Celtic Frost? Is it true that they got lost in the Pandemonium, never to be seen again? Nah, they just quit. Anyhow, welcome back to Ruthless Metal, and in today's Ranking All video, we're going to take on the discography of one of the most important metal bands of all time, the grandfathers of extreme metal, Celtic Frost. And Celtic Frost formed out of the ashes of Hellhammer back in 1984. And besides being one of the grandfathers of all things extreme, they were also known for some rather bad decisions, which we're going to talk about in this video. And Celtic Frost had a rather small discography, only 6 full-length studio albums, but they still had a huge impact on the metal scene, especially back in the 80s. And I also want to say rest in peace to Martin Eric Ain, who passed away in 2017. So if you're a Celtic Frost fan, then smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss out when I rank the discography of other great metal bands. And now it's time to rank Celtic Frost albums from the worst to the best. The worst Celtic Frost album is of course 1988's Cold Lake, and this album was heavily influenced by the glam wave of the 80s. And it was indeed a weird path that Celtic Frost took from being the pioneers of extreme metal to this. It was a shocker. Celtic Frost were more or less as big and popular as Slayer back in the 80s, but they kinda ruined their reputation with this record. Even if I think that in retrospect this album ain't as bad as Metallica's Worst Efforts, for example. But for 1988 this album was a total shocker. The hilarious clammed up band photo on the back of the album didn't exactly help their credibility. But Celtic Frost never sounded like Poison, even if they kinda looked like them. Cherry Orchards and Juices Like Wine had some cool riffs in them, but the lyrics are kinda what you expect from a late 80s LA band. And Martin Eric Ain had left the band prior to this record, and I strongly believe that this album wouldn't have happened if he still was with the band. Even Tom G. Warrior has admitted that this album was a huge mistake, and I agree, rarely has one album killed a band's career, but it wouldn't be a stretch to say that Cold Lake did. Next. In 5th place we have Vanity / Nemesis, which is the follow-up to Cold Lake. And I think it's clear that the band understood that they took it a bit too far on their last record, because on Vanity Nemesis the band took one step back. And back in the lineup was drummer Steven Priestley, and Martin Eric Ain joined the band halfway into the recording of this album. And this album is still very experimental, but I guess there wouldn't be no Celtic Frost without experimentation. And there are some female vocals on this album, and overall it's kind of a progressive thrash record, with some hints of that glam style of Cold Lake. It's not dark and sinister like the early days of the band, but it's not them trying to be Poison either, except on the song Wings of Solitude. That one is kinda ass, to be honest. And Tom throws in some here and there, but this album just never reaches the heights of them in their prime. I think that Vanity / Nemesis is an album for you who wants to dig deeper into the band's discography. But if you live out your days without ever hearing this record, I think that's fine too. So, next. In 4th place we have Into the Pandemonium from 1987. And this album is very different from the band's first 2 records. Celtic Frost always modified their sound to some extent, and you gotta give it to them for taking all these risks, because we would never have had those groundbreaking early records without them taking risks and venturing into realms that no other bands had gone before them. This record is very experimental. Just take the song Mexican Radio for example. That song was just weird, and it was an example of what Celtic Frost shouldn't be doing with their time. And Tom singing on Mesmerized, it was just weak. So at its worst, Into the Pandemonium was more or less as bad as Cold Lake. But then we have songs like Inner Sanctum and Babylon Fell, and those are 2 great tracks. Dark and pummeling metal, just like in the good old days. The song Tristesse de la Lune is some sort of string orchestration with female vocals sung in French, and it sounds more like something that you would hear on an opera more than on a metal record. So for me, this was the beginning of the downfall for Celtic Frost. Next. In third place we have Monotheist, and this album came out in 2006, some 16 years after their last studio album Vanity Nemesis. And I'm glad that they did this album before Martin Ain passed away, because they came back and showed the world one more time why Celtic Frost were a legendary band back in the day. Monotheist is one dark and powerful record, and listening to this album it's like running into a wall. It's an overpowering record. And I can understand that it's not for everyone, because this sounds like 2 Therion on Brain Damage. It's noisy as hell and the sound is very fuzzy, so much that the album becomes like a wall of sound. And the album has a modern production to it. And I've read different reviews of this album, and they are all over the board. Some love it, some hate it, but it leaves no one untouched. Me, I love it. This album is outside my usual comfort zone, but I think it's undeniably great. This album is more about atmospheres and moods than heavy riffs. It's also one of the most evil sounding records that I've ever heard. It's to a level that it's chilling to listen to this album when you're home alone. And I saw them live when they toured this album, and I'm real happy that I did, because it was one of the most powerful live shows that I've ever witnessed. Even if Tom refuses to take off that silly hat of his. And I don't think that anyone expected Celtic Frost to return to a level of artistry and creativity of their mid-80s albums. But Monotheist was a triumphant return, and one last strong statement from a band that had been ridiculed ever since they put out that Cold Lake album. Next. In second place we have Morbid Tales from 1984, and this was originally released as an EP in Europe, but in the States they added the songs Dethroned Emperor and Morbid Tales to make it a full LP. So that's why I decided to include it here in my rank, and otherwise this video would have been way too short. So anyhow, I almost put this album in first place because I think it's one of the greatest debut albums in metal. Into the Crypts of Race is an amazing opener. It's fast and thrashing, and they really set the standard right away. Celtic Frost had this doom-like heaviness to them that a band like Slayer, for example, lacked. Dethroned Emperor and Procreation of the Wicked are two good examples of this. They didn't have to play fast to prove their point. And I love everything about this record. The guitar tone, the drumming, those bended guitar notes, and all the Morbid Tales is just a landmark in extreme metal. Next. The greatest Celtic Frost album is, in my opinion, 2 Therion. And yes, this is experimentation done the right way. Because this is one of the most powerful records that I've ever heard. The orchestration of Innocence and Wrath sets the standard right away. I'm just waiting for the stormtroopers to kick in my door when I hear that intro, because it sounds like a film score to me. And this album is like the perfect mix of the heaviness of doom with the power and speed of thrash. And throw in some bombastic drums, some French horn, and some operatic female backing vocals, and you got yourself a beast of a record. And that might be a warning sign for most other records when they start to use instruments that aren't the standard guitar, bass, drums and keyboards. But I must say that I love French horn. And more or less every track on this album is a masterpiece. Jewel Throne, The Usurper, Circle of the Tyrants and Necromantical Screams. And Tom G. Warrior has never sounded better than this, and the band is just ferocious here. This is one of the true masterpieces of extreme metal. And 2 Therion is Greek for the Great Beast, and this is surely Celtic Frost's Great Beast. So, let's have a look at my list then. And this is Celtic Frost albums ranked from the worst to the best. And now I'm curious to hear about your favorite Celtic Frost albums down below. Are you team Morbid Tales or team 2 Mega Therion? Or are you some sort of weirdo that prefers any of their other releases? Let me know your favorites down below, and feel free to rank their full discography if you're familiar with it. And if you enjoyed this video, then smash that like button and subscribe with the bell notifications turned on, so you won't miss out when I post my next videos here on the channel. And if you wanna support my work, then you can become a Patreon like these fine gentlemen, or go and grab yourself some merch at the Ruthless metal store. All my links are listed down below. And let me know whose discography I should rank in the next video. And that's it, folks. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.